Sandra Lodewick. I have 3 kids with type 1, so our family is really in it. I really appreciate these sessions from all angles, and I'm happy to help out. So we're really happy to have you here, and we have a few questions that we sort of teed up ahead of time that after looking at some of the research that you've been doing, that we thought that kind of crosswalked with some of the questions that families have been hoping that we could have some discussion on. But we also want to keep this really sort of organic and conversational. So that might be a good place for us to start.
So my name is Jill Weissberg-Benchell, which is a mouthful, so please just call me Jill. I am a pediatric psychologist, which means that I specialize in working with children and teenagers and the people that love them that happen to have a chronic illness. And my specialty is working on diabetes teams. I've worked on diabetes teams now for about 30 years. A certified diabetes care and education specialist as well. I do not have diabetes myself, so I will never pretend for a moment that I know what it's like, because I honestly have no idea. I do my best to understand, but no matter what it is I do, and no matter what it is I eat, and no matter what it is that how much I exercise, my blood sugars pretty much are between 70 and 130 all the time. So I don't know. But my job is really twofold. One is I work with families when they're newly diagnosed in the hospital. My hospital actually admits all of our newly diagnosed kids for a couple of days to do some intensive education and teaching. I know that around the country, a lot of places do teaching outpatient. My hospital does inpatient. And I work with families if children are really challenged with really high blood sugars and are struggling and they need some admission. And then some outpatient psychotherapy for families and children that are struggling with the day-to-day exhaustion of the demands of diabetes. And then the other part that I do is I do research. And all of it is really to figure out how to improve people's lives, how to make living with diabetes a little bit less of a burden, a little less exhausting. So I know that some of you guys reached out to me because I was fortunate enough to do a couple of studies looking at how amazing camp is and the importance of going to camp in children's lives. But I've also done studies to try to prevent depression and improve resilience in teenagers with diabetes. I'm working on a study now to try to support families and provide more help for them in the first year after diagnosis. And I'm also working with the bionic pancreas team, which is one of the closed loop systems that's in research to figure out whether or not it improves people's quality of life. So that's just a little bit about what I do.
Thank you. That's fabulous. And yeah, it piques so many questions for me. So I think that maybe a great place to start might be a question that we get a lot from families is related to, some families say, my child it seems like they have like diabetes apathy, and in some cases is burnout. Sometimes it just is sort of avoidant coping. It's not even necessarily burnout. So I know that you've done research related to that, and I wonder if there is anything that you could share with us about sort of why kids might approach it this way, strategies that you've found can be most supportive for that kind of dynamic, or anything else along those lines that you could share.
That's a big question.
Yes, it is.
I think that the first thing is to just sort of stop and think about what it must be like to be in their shoes. And part of it is, but when I come home from work, nobody says to me, what's your blood sugar? What did you eat? What were your numbers today? How come you didn't let me know what you were doing? Nobody's asking me about my biology. And I would find that really invasive and kind of obnoxious, actually. And so I think that a part of it is that as parents, when we worry about our children, we want them to be healthy, we want them to be safe, we want to make sure that the decisions that they've made are sort of the best ones that they could. We wind up starting our conversations with them about, like, what was your blood sugar at lunch? Or, why did you not respond to your alarm? I kept texting you and you didn't respond to me. Or something like, so the conversation is about, why are you high? Why is your number a number that I'm not happy about? Or what did you eat? And so kids begin to hear that not as, oh, my parents love me and they're worried about me and they want me to be well, and they're letting me know that they're really concerned. Instead, they hear it as, I don't trust you. I don't value the decisions that you're making. And I could do it better than you're doing it. And that's not a great message if your goal is, we're in this together, we're a team, it's diabetes that sucks, not you, right? And so I don't see those conversations ever as malicious, intended, mean-spirited. This is not about psychopathology or bad parenting or anything like that at all. It's about a parent that loves their children, wants their children to be healthy and well, but sometimes the way in which they ask questions that are diabetes specific, the child or teenager in particular is hearing those messages as, you're not as competent as I'd like you to be. And that is not a great recipe for partnership. So I think that sometimes sets the stage inadvertently for some of that, I'm done, I'm exhausted. So that's one piece. I think another piece is, oh my God, you've all had days where no matter what, even though you've done absolutely everything right, and I mean everything right, those numbers are not ever under 250 for 5 minutes. You've done everything. That's exhausting, right? Or all of a sudden they're low and there's no way that should be. It makes no sense whatsoever based on what you've done. And so there are days when numbers just make no sense, even if you've done everything right. And that has to set you up for feeling demoralized, because there's almost no other part of our lives where if you put energy, effort, and dedication, that you still have absolutely no idea what the result is going to be. And when we have puberty in the mix, oh my God, right? With all the hormones that hate insulin, right? So you're insulin resistant during puberty. Nobody tells you that. So, I mean, sometimes I've had kids literally take pictures of blood sugar numbers as it's on the way up, as it's on the way down, just to capture that one moment in time where it's like, look, I'm 108. But I think that's just a piece of that sense of just like, I can't do this anymore, is that sometimes even when the whole team is working beautifully together, it can be exhausting because it doesn't make sense and diabetes doesn't follow rules. So I think that's a piece of it too. I also think, the last thing I'll just say is, not everybody has diabetes. And so especially if you're in an environment where you feel like you have to be the same as everybody else and you want to fit in and you don't want to be different, diabetes, says, hi, I'm not the same as you. And that might not be in a way that you're proud of or that you want to take ownership of. And it's really hard to be different in that way. So those are just some thoughts off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's fabulous. It's funny hearing you talk. It feels like, wow, the sort of avoidant coping is like, you would imagine, like everyone should be in that mode, like based on the reality that is type 1. It feels like that should be everyone's baseline. And then you work and I will say that I also struck a chord with me because my mother has type 1, and I've shared this with this group before, but I just can really relate to being the person who, even as like the daughter of an adult, who, when you don't have this, or if you as a parent managing your little kids as they grow, you don't have it, but you're in it. And I will never understand what my kids go through and the responsibility they have, but I understand it so differently now than I did when I was a child of someone with type 1. But I was one of those people who just felt like, why is my mom, why is she low again? Or why, I had no clue. Right. And so I, as someone who now is on the other side of it, I think, these are everyday people, including the people like within your family unit who are having those reactions. It's really challenging. Have you found that there are, what you said to me, it sort of begs in my mind the starting place with like reminding ourselves as caregivers that the starting place needs to be, the team approach, and focus on the type 1, not on the child's behavior or response, but other sort of strategies or tips you have on how to kind of keep us in check or remind us of how to make this, set the dynamic, make the dynamic as kind of strong as it can be to support them in this kind of, in these ways.
Well, I think part of it is the age of your child, how organized they are, and what skill sets they bring, right? So if I have, I mean, I have 2 grown-up children now, but my daughter that I was mentioning to you guys, that's a teacher and a camp counselor and a camp director now, she has ADHD. There's no way pre-medication that I could ever expect her to be able to be organized enough to remember to bring supplies. She would have left all of her supplies everywhere. She would have left them at friends' houses. She would have left them under the desk in her school. I mean, it's just, she just didn't have the skill set. She's very, very smart, but she didn't have the skill set to stay organized. And so if I got mad at her every time she left something, all I'd be doing is yelling at her and telling her that she's disorganized and that I can't trust her. And I don't want to give her that message. So you think about every one of your children needs a different sort of approach to parenting because their temperaments are different. What they need is different. How they respond to feedback is different. So this is, you have to personalize and individualize what I'm about to say. But I think that based on where your child is developmentally, I think the first thing is to ask them, what is it that I can do that would make things easier for you? And this is hard. What are the things I do that really annoy you? What are the things you'd really like me to stop doing? Right? Because they're going to tell you if you open the door up, you might not like what they say. But if you give them the space to be honest, they will let you know. And that's a great launching off point for making some changes. And I'll share one very concrete story. This happened years ago, but it's one of my favorite stories. One mom came up to me and she said, I have a confession. And I was like, okay. And she said, every time my child would come home from school, I'd say, what are you? What are you? What are you? And finally, my child looked at me and said, hi, I'm Matthew. I'm your son. It's nice to meet you. And she said she just burst into tears because she realized that unintentionally she was telling him that his blood sugar number was more important to her than who he was, how his day was, or anything about him as a total human being. So, and the other thing I'll just tell you is I had one young lady tell me that her mother had 4 different ways of saying okay. And she knew based on the inflection of her mother's voice, whether or not she was in big trouble and whether it was a diabetes trouble or a different kind of trouble, just by the word okay. And so I think that our kids really pick up on our non-overt messages. And sometimes they might be misperceiving them. So asking them, I think, and having that dialogue is going to be the best way to figure out how to give that message of we're in this together and we're a team.
That's really helpful. I think every parent has the, what is your number as a first question. I shouldn't say every parent, but I'd imagine that most parents are guilty of that. And I also find it interesting that the other one of the children you mentioned had a category that was diabetes trouble. I know I'm in trouble and I know if it's diabetes trouble, which is also really telling. I don't know if there are any parents on the call that want to, have either say anything comment on this or have a question related to this before we kind of move off, but I want to open it up in case, because it's a big topic, in case anybody wants to jump in here.
Feel free to disagree with me, by the way.
Jill, it's Reva
Yes.
Seward. I can't remember what you said. Are you here in Oregon as well? I can't remember.
No, I'm actually in Chicago, Reva.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Well, no, I appreciated everything you just said, and I wrote that down. So my son was diagnosed in kindergarten when he was 6, and he is now 11. So we're 5 years in, but it almost brings tears to my eyes to think about what we say and how we ask. And it's true. And I'm really conscious about it, but it's still, they know they're different and it's hard.
It is.
But
really
I
hard.
work really hard on it. I've read tons of books, and we run a support group down here in Southern Oregon, in Medford, Oregon, for youth with type 1 diabetes and their families. So I like helping them, pretty passionate about it. But
I love that you're doing that. I love that you're doing that, Reva, because when I interview families to reflect on what it was like in that first year, there are two main things that I hear more than anything. Please tell everybody that you ever meet that perfection is not possible and numbers are going to vary. So don't even try for perfection because it's exhausting. And then the other one is, please reach out for help and support from other people that have been through this. Do not do this journey on your own. Get support, meet people in the diabetes community, because they're going to give you the best advice, the best ideas, and they know exactly what you're going through. So I love that you're there for them. That's amazing.
Thanks. Well, I appreciate your input.
My pleasure.
There's I just wanted on the chat, there's a great question about, can you model a healthy conversation opener? How do you transition to asking about blood sugars? Do you have any insight or tips on that?
I like to take a one down position with my kids because it really surprises them when a grown-up says, hey, I might have made a mistake and I'd like your feedback on it. I wouldn't use those exact words, but sometimes they're like, what? Because they're so used to us, in a more hierarchical relationship to them. So just even saying things like, I've been thinking a lot about how I talk to you, about the things I think about around diabetes. And I'm wondering if sometimes, even though I don't mean to, I come across as if I'm blaming you or I'm upset about either what you've done or about your numbers. Is that possible that that's what I do? And they're going to be like, oh my God, of course you do. So just by opening it up like that gives them permission to sort of walk in. I had one young man tell me that there's no such thing as helicopter parenting with CGM anymore. It's drone. They get like right in there. They get right in your face. And I was like, wow, that is like, I can see it, right? I mean, it was such a great description. Sometimes what winds up happening. And, most families will tell me, especially at the beginning of their CGM journey, like all they are is like number surfers, right? All they are is looking at the numbers all the time. And like, and talk about exhausting. Yeah.
Lisa, did you have a question or comment you wanted to say? I might've missed your hand up.
I do. Thank you.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi. Thank you for being here for this. My son was diagnosed at 15 months, and he's now 7, and he's on Control IQ. We really trust the pump and the CGM to, except when we need to enter carbs, to manage his blood sugars, and so far it's been successful for us. Not perfection, but we've been on it for less than a year, and control has been we've been pretty satisfied with it. And of course there's that like added different dynamic in that they've been home for 14 months now, and therefore not like at school and out of sight, and we don't really. I'm curious for your thoughts about how these closed loop systems are changing that dynamic with parents feeling the need to check in with their kids on something that they're not necessarily as much in direct control over as they used to be. That was minimally eloquent, but let me know.
It's a really good question.
Yeah.
I can honestly tell you, I don't know, because you're sort of bringing both the closed loop, like the Control IQ world, plus the pandemic world together. So right now, it's easy because you're all there together. And then once your child is free to go back out into the world more, what's that going to be like? And I honestly don't know. In studies that have looked at Control IQ in particular, parents say that they sleep better than they did before the closed loop system. Parents say that they have confidence in their the product's ability to manage out of range numbers. So they find it less overwhelming than a CGM and a pump that don't talk to each other. But they still have diabetes, you know, and they still need insulin, and numbers can, you know, technology can fail. A pump can fail. You can have an occlusion in a site. You can lose Bluetooth connection. Your child can get some viral illness, you know, just like the regular old flu. And we're going to see that again at some point in time. And that do wacky things to blood sugars. And so then, you know, I'm not sure what's going to happen. But I think that it's better, but it's not totally hands off. I haven't answered your question because I don't know. I don't think we know. But it's okay to be worried. It's okay to be nervous, and it's okay to go, gosh, this is something that we don't even know what's going to happen. I think we have to not forget that when our kids get back to school, we have to re-educate everybody in the school again, make sure the 504s are up to date, that teachers, gym teachers, substitute teachers, everybody knows what's going on, that whatever your medical management plan is in your child's school, everybody's on board. So we have to make sure that all of that is in place again, and not assume that the school nurses actually know anything about diabetes.
I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about, several parents sort of want to help their children see their own strength in managing type 1. Not that they want to, you know, spin it into something positive, but they want to help them see, you know, all of the strength and resilience that they have through this. And I know you've done research related to diabetes resilience and kind of protective factors. I'm wondering if you can share what you've learned, and if you have any thoughts for parents who do want to try to help their kids, one like be more resilient, but also celebrate their resilience and, you know, take ownership for that as well. So if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't think it's really any different than building resilience in anything else. It's about trusting your children's judgment, giving them an opportunity to share their thoughts and ideas as far as problem solving. You know, hey, this, you know, you're 420. How would you like to address that? What are your thoughts? You know, oh, I like that idea. And it might be a different idea than you have, but, you know, okay, let's try it. You want to drink a whole bunch of water and jump on the trampoline? Okay, how long do you think we should give that, you know, a try before we think about another choice? You know, probably 420. I don't know if I'd go with that, maybe a little insulin first. But, you know, just giving them an opportunity to share with you what their thoughts are, giving them some feedback, giving them ownership, you know, letting them sort of run some of the ideas as long as it's not dangerous, and support them. And then with the, how'd that work for you? Do you think that, you know, if you're in this situation again, you do it again this way, or do you think you might do it differently? So engaging them in active problem solving and supporting them, I think, is a great way to build resilience. Anytime they do anything that you're really proud of, just let them know how proud you are of them. And anytime they just do basic tasks like count carbohydrates and take insulin before a meal, you can be like, that was awesome. I'm so proud of you that you pre-bolused. Like, just like give them like a high five for doing that. Cause you know what? Teenagers never pre-bolused. There isn't a grown-up around. So if they did it, I want to celebrate it. So I think that, you know, believing in them, letting them know that there are days that are hard, but in general, they have the resources to be able to handle tough times. Remind them what their skill sets are. So do they have really good friends? Are they really good at school? Do they have a particular extracurricular that they're really, really good at? Like, let's do things that are not diabetes that we're celebrating as well as diabetes that we're celebrating. I'm so proud of you that you went to your drum solo and, you know, diabetes didn't stop you for 5 seconds. I think that's freaking awesome. You know, saying things like that is really helpful. Building resilience, but it's, you know, bringing, you know, it's everything that they're good at, and diabetes problem solving is part of that. And then some days just suck, and we're going to ride through the day, but it has no reflection on who you are as a person, and we're not going to give up. because some days are hard, but tomorrow is going to happen and we get to start all over again tomorrow. And that's definitely a piece of resilience, is not focusing on the negative to the exclusion of everything that was good.
Yeah, that's important. Well, sort of related to that, I noticed some of your research was kind of related to girls and diabetes distress, and that they say maybe more prone to chronic diabetes distress, especially girls or adolescents and teenagers who are kind of prone to perfectionism. Is there anything additional? I mean, those all sound like they would be applicable strategies for kind of that scenario, but is there anything different or kind of unique related to that sort of, we have one of our kids, we had that concern, like she has a perfectionist personality. And when you layer, it's like a chicken and egg kind of thing, but that's a hard thing with type 1, as you noted before, because you can do everything right and you don't get the outcome that you're looking for. So is there anything that might be useful for us to hear outside of what you just discussed?
Yeah, there are two things. First, I honestly think that boys have the same amount of distress as girls. It's just that boys don't acknowledge it. And I think that that's true in most measures of emotional functioning, because if you look in psychology in general, boys and men are less likely to say that they're feeling depressed, that they're anxious, that they have poor quality of life. And I don't think it's that they feel less. I think they're like, oh, I don't know what this questionnaire is about, or I'm not going to tell a stranger, or I'm not going to, I'm not going to do this, like, sort of share my deepest, darkest experiences with somebody I don't know. But women are like, oh yeah, I'll tell you how sad I am. Oh yeah, I'll tell you about this challenge that I had. So I think that there's a difference in comfort and sharing. I don't think there's a difference in experience. I have no data to support what I just said, but I think it's true. So that's one thing. And then the other is, I think that with people that are a little bit more perfectionistic, regardless of their gender, to say things like, you tend to be a perfectionist. That's sort of who you are. You like to get things just so. Diabetes is going to make that a little bit harder for you, right? Because of your tendency to want to get everything right. You're just going to face more frustrations because diabetes doesn't play by those rules. Perfection is not possible with diabetes. So I'm just wondering about that. Like, do you want to think about diabetes in a different bucket than like your grades in school or making the varsity lacrosse team, or, and so you could, even if they're like, no, I have to be perfect in everything, just by wondering out loud, acknowledging who they are as a person and their temperament, and just pointing out that there might be things in their life that's just like, it's not a great combination. And do they want to think about that piece any differently, can be helpful, because one day they're going to come back and remember that conversation.
That is useful.
And it's giving them permission to be who they are.
I want to pause for a minute if there are other parents that want to jump in with comments or questions. Okay.
Put a jacket on.
One of the other things, this is all really so useful and relevant for the day-to-day. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, I thought it was really interesting, one of the studies you did that was looking at sort of parent and child concordance or discordance and the relationship with the measures that you had of diabetes strength and A1C, and kind of what that might tell us about, parent-child dynamics and how that interplays.
So first of all, why are you reading all my studies? Like, nobody.
I was preparing.
So,
my God.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm very embarrassed. There are a couple of things that not just my work, but other people's work have found. When parents are unhappy or really stressed, kids pick up on it. And I mean, it's just a fact. This is not like a guilt trip or anything like that, but our children are primed to pay attention to our emotional well-being. How are we doing? How are we going about our world? Because we're their sun and their moon, right? Everything is about us to them. And so even if they don't let you know that, so I think they have a very keen awareness of our emotional well-being. And if we're not doing well, they're not going to do well. And which means that self-care is vital for us as grown-ups, and we almost never do it, right? Because we're like, no, I have to work. No, I have to take care of my children. No, I have to take care of my spouse. No, I've got these responsibilities. And then we forget about taking care of ourselves. So that's a plea to please spend some time to take care of yourselves, because you need to have that that strength and that energy to be able to fully be there for your family. So that's one thing. Another is that in general, children, if we're not doing well emotionally, they'll almost always assume it's because of them, right? So children are very self-centered, and I don't mean that in the obnoxious, oh my God, you're so self-centered, but just like the world revolves around them, and that's developmentally appropriate and exactly where they should be. And so if they see their parents not doing well, or bickering or arguing, or their mom or dad is particularly moody or irritable or sad or stressed, they're going to think that's probably something about them. So I think one of the ways to think about that is, if you are having a hard time, to be open about it and let your kids know, not for them to take care of you. It's never your child's job to take care of you, but to let them know that maybe you've got a particularly stressful thing going on, or you're struggling with something and you're getting help, or you're working it out, but it's not about them, and that they don't need to worry about you, and you're going to be fine. And because if you don't give words to it, they're going to make up something in their mind and their thinking that's going to be worse than whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's sort of the concordance piece, is that our kids are just so allied and tied with us. The other thing that you're asking about that's more of a research thing is that if parents are really, really distressed, even if the children are not all that distressed, the children's A1Cs, their glycemic control is not as good. So there's something about parent exhaustion and parent overwhelmedness that leads to just less optimal A1Cs in their children. But that's kind of like, that's not really all that like, oh, like it's not such a big deal. I mean, any parent will go like, well, duh, right? Like if I'm really exhausted and overwhelmed and I'm not paying as much attention, then things aren't going to go as well, because I have got other stuff that took priority right now. That's fine, right? Life happens.
That's a really great perspective to actually tie that observation to, because I think there's a lot of opportunities as parents also, who I think parents can fall into the same, you feel like you need to do everything right, and when things don't go right. And so especially if you know that your stress, or if will have an impact, it's important to remember, and this too shall pass, and then tomorrow is another day, and give ourselves the same advice that we would be giving to our kids around the resilience and that piece of it. So that is really
important. Find
out
who your supports are, right? So do you have a best friend? Do you have a puppy? I saw somebody petting the cutest dog on their couch. I don't know who it was, but oh my God, was that cute. Oh yeah, it was Kristen. Yeah, there you go. Like, oh my God, look at that dog. So, it's your pets, your friends, your family members, a therapist, reaching out to the diabetes online community. I mean, my gosh, who else is up at 3 o'clock in the morning waiting for your child's blood sugar to go up? But then another parent that also has a kid that's got a low, and you might be in Portland and the other parent's in Florida, right? But you know exactly what's going on, and you guys might be watching some horrible television show online together just to keep each other awake as you're checking your child and making sure that their numbers are going up. Nobody understands it like that parent, right? So, depending on what you need, making sure that you are always comfortable asking for help. Because I think that a uniquely American trait that is not one to be proud of is this message that somehow we have to be completely independent and do everything on our own. And if we need to ask for help, somehow we are less worthy. And I really, that's an American message that really upsets me as a psychologist, because it's exactly against all of the longitudinal data and long-term health. So people that actually have good supports and friends and don't try to do everything on their own, they live longer, a lot longer. They have less chronic illness. They're happier. They have more long-term relationships. So that message of you have to do it on your own or somehow you're less worthy, it's a real, it's a false message. And I think it's a dangerous one. I have opinions. I'm sorry.
I want to open it up for conversation, but I do want to say one thing as a as someone who did not read all of your studies, but did glance through them in preparation for this, that it's not, I wasn't just geeking out, but when you have, when you're in our position, you feel like every one of those studies is written, like you see yourself in all of them. So it's actually really great reading. So, yeah, here, another comment here. Parents are not typically taught how to parent a child with a chronic illness. Most parents learn as they go and step through many minefields along the way. Is there a book which you feel covers many of the basics of how to take care of their special needs child?
I have not been thrilled with any books, honest to goodness. And even like, if you just go to like the parenting aisle, there are like, I don't know, 200 books on parenting your toddler and 200 books on parenting your teenager. They all have different advice and they all tell you if you don't follow their recommendations, you're going to screw up your child. And that just can't be. It just can't be. So I think that the most important message that we can give our children is that they're not fragile and that nothing horrible is going to happen. Everybody's afraid of that. But you don't want your child to hear, oh my God, did you hear about that kid that died in Australia in the middle of the night? And, like, oh, like, no, don't talk about. So any way that you can let your child know that they are not fragile, that you believe in them, that no matter what it is that they want to do, diabetes is not going to stop them. And if you need to do more advocacy to make sure diabetes doesn't stop them and whatever it is they want to do, if you need to make more phone calls, if you need to bring other resources, you're going to do it because you're all in it together, but you're not going to let diabetes stop them. Anyway, you can give your child the message that they can do anything. Well, if anybody told me I could do math, I would know they were lying. But, I think that that's another way of sort of just building resilience, is to not ever give the message that somehow because of diabetes that your child is more fragile or that there are things that they can't do. Sometimes you have to do a lot more work to make it happen. That is true, but there shouldn't be any can'ts.
Mm-hmm. Other comments or questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Jill, in my experience, most of the parents I work with, especially the ones who have fairly more sort of newly diagnosed children, they have a lot of fear and they see their child as being fairly fragile. And so I think it's very easy to inadvertently communicate that sense of fragility. How would you talk to a parent who might be dealing with a lot of their own anxieties and fears around diabetes?
Oh, I asked them directly, what are your biggest worries? What are your biggest fears? What are the things that keep you up at night? I want to address them directly. And there will be things like, what if my child has a low in the middle of the night and I don't know? What if my child has 3 days in a row where I can't get their blood sugars under 300? What if I feed my child pizza and then they get into the ice cream? What's going to happen? Is that going to ruin their eyes? Is that going to kill their kidneys? So we talk about the stories that they've heard, the great Aunt Sally stories. Oh, my great Aunt Sally had diabetes and now she's blind and they cut off 2 toes and oh yeah, she's starting dialysis tomorrow. And you're like, that really sucks for your great Aunt Sally, but it has nothing to do with your child, right? And so I think the other thing is that I find really powerful. There are 2 other things actually that I find really powerful. One is, when did analog insulins come out? 15 years ago? At most, 15 years ago. So any human being that's had type 1 diabetes for longer than 15 years, their long-term health is completely irrelevant to anybody that's been diagnosed in the last 15 years, just because of analog insulins. We now have CGM and they're accurate, right? Forget the harpoon days of the old Medtronic horrendous thing. Forget that, right? Because it hurt like hell and it wasn't accurate. But the Dexcom now and the Freestyle, they're dead on accurate, right? And so you now have the ability to predict where numbers are going and get on top of numbers before you get to a number you don't want to have. We never had that ability before. So if you're looking at any of the data, if there's any parents that are digging into research and Googling things, they can't read anything that's more than 5 years old unless they want the history lesson, right? Because every 5 years, everything I think I know about diabetes is old news. So I think that's important. I think that the information about the Joslin 75-year medal winners and the 50-year medal winners, and that there are like less than 10% of them that have common, how could that be? You know, they had one insulin shot a day, and they were like, you know, trying to sharpen their syringes on Sundays because they had to keep reusing the needle, and it hurt like hell on Friday and Saturday. So like that people are doing well that had what we would consider horrendous, abhorrent care is really important. So I think that that's really important information. And then there's one other thing. This is so interesting to me. A parent that was highly educated, a physician, actually an emergency room physician, her child was diagnosed. And she was saying, you don't understand. Every time my child has a 250 or a 300 or 350, I know their kidneys are dying. And I said, no. And so we talked a little bit about where that belief came from. And it was all emotion. She had no data to support it. And then, because there is no data to support that statement. And then I said, you know, because we put her child on a Dexcom right away. And I said, so the goal is 70% time in range. And if you can keep 70% time in range, their A1C is going to be 7 or lower. And mom said, what are you talking about 70%? 70% is a D. It's a D minus. It's an F. 70% is completely unacceptable. I never get below 95% in anything I do. And I was like, whoa, like stop. So one of the things that was it was so important for me to hear this, mom, because I think that in the diabetes world, we're just, 70% time in range is great. But there are people that are those, you know, type A personality perfectionists, and they hear that as like a horrendously stupid, because they're going to never try for 70% because that is literally a D on an exam. And they see that as a fail. And so to help people rethink, like, what does that mean for their child's health? And so I completely changed the way I talk about that now, because of that parent's willingness to share that perception with me. It was great. It was a great learning experience for me.
That is interesting. I feel like, just speaking of the lack of books out there that really get this, the books that I feel like would be most useful, like I feel like my mother should write a book, because my mother is not a, you know, she's someone who's had diabetes now for 50 years. So she's one of those people who, like, she only had her, when she first got it, she had her blood sugar tested when she went to the doctor every 6 months, and everything else was just guess and go. But she's so not, I mean, it's a huge gift to me because she doesn't have any secondary complications, and she is not in the least bit, she's not rigid. She's just living her life. And I think it's such a great example of how liberated you can be with type 1 and not always live in fear of having to micromanage, or else there's going to be these secondary complications. I also am always curious about research, like the physiological research of how, you know, how different people's bodies have, you know, they may be more protective towards not having the secondary, even if they are not in great control. And so that is something that I'm always curious if there's, like, what we're learning about that, because imagine if we could figure that out and somehow it could be applied to people with type 1 so that they could somehow get those protective factors. But I think that I think is a really important story to hear, is that and it's great to think about it in the terms you put it. Anyone who's had type 1 for more than the past 15 years, you know, is living proof that you don't have to be perfect to be healthy in this stage. So that's really useful. There was something else that you said flagged in my mind, and I can't think of what it was.
I lose my track of thinking all the time.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a newly diagnosed teen. We're about 8 months in, and we've moved into the avoidant coping phase of it. And I struggle with the balance of, like, how long should I just let that be his process until he kind of figures these things out on his own? And when is it like, no, as being a bad parent, I need to jump in and straighten the course of this ship. So part of it is like a psychological thing, and part of it is just like a medical thing. Like, and I don't quite know where that line is. I don't know if any of you have feedback on that or advice, or if that makes sense.
Do other people want to step in and offer some suggestions?
When did you say your child was diagnosed, Annie?
Just this summer, July.
Oh, okay. Well, that is hard. Yeah, you're newly diagnosed family. So that's hard. You're gonna have to go through the grieving stages, and those are different. I'm now 5 years in, but when I meet with groups like this, it's a reminder of how I'm business as usual. So I run it like a business and I just do it. But then when I talk about it, I realize, oh, wow, we do a lot daily. It's just what we do. How old is your child?
16.
16. Okay, so it's different.
I've
Yeah.
never been the one who's the sole manager of it, because right from the gate, he's had a lot of autonomy and independence.
And he is, I guess it depends, like Jill had said about skill set. My son is very forgetful about stuff. So I'm constantly reminding, but he was diagnosed when he was in kindergarten, 6 years old. Now he's 11, but he will forget things just because he's a forgetful kid. But I have 3 boys and they're all different. The middle one would be totally responsible. So if your 16-year-old is responsible and kind of does it, you kind of have to decide and see how the numbers are. I don't know if he's on a pump yet or a CGM, but yeah, so those things come later. I think it's better to learn how to do it manually anyway, because then you don't have that fear. Like if the equipment fails, you already know how to do it, or he does. But yeah, so you're just summer of last year, 2020?
Yep.
Okay, so what, 9 months in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm just trying to think back. It's a hard time. Yeah, you kind of just wade through. You're going to just get so much smarter and compassionate. That's kind of what we just wade through it one day at a time is my phrase.
I'd also say a couple things. One is I think that none of my kids were diagnosed when they were in their teens. They were all younger. And I think that must be one of the most challenging times of diagnosis, just because there's so many other things going on in life. And there's the parent-child dynamic is really different and not as straightforward in terms of who's responsible for what. So I feel you for that. I also feel like, he got diagnosed in the most isolating year in the of all time, right? So it's like he doesn't have any all of our kids with type 1 or without type 1 are struggling for a connection right now and some sense of normalcy. So to layer that on top of it, one, he probably wants whatever interactions he can have with people to be as normal as they can be, given that everything is so upside down. But he also hasn't had a chance to interact with anyone or see anybody else like him, his age with type 1. Which I think makes a really big difference, just having a sense of solidarity and community and seeing other people are going through the same. Other people, you can get you can be angry with someone in the sense that you can share your anger and they get it and they're going to know it. So I hope that will change for him, and I hope that there are ways this summer that he can connect with people, and hopefully this year. I think that's really critical. I also, the other thing I'd say is that one of our kids in particular, I think struggles more with the burnout and apathy than others. And it's hard as a parent, it's hard for me to not feel all the things that Jill was saying in the beginning are what I intuitively want, not to be frustrated and not to just start to talking about the numbers. And do you understand why this isn't good for you? And every time that I've tried to approach it that way, it has not helped. And it has always helped, or it has more often helped when we've, recognized it as, I guess, just have the empathy for he's responding to this because it's a hell of a lot of a responsibility for him to be dealing with. And it's the first thing that he has to think about every minute of every day. And it's the first interaction we're having with him all the time. So when I can step back from my own needs in this and just and you likely have done this, just to say what's going to make it easier for you, what can we do? This is really hard, and you're not on the zone, we're in this together, but there are certain things that have to become like brushing your teeth. They're just things we do. So what are the things that we can do as a family that are going to make it less burdensome for you? And I'm sure you're having those conversations, but I guess the other thing I'd add is that he's not always going to be whatever sort of avoidant mechanisms he's having right now. I guess I can't guarantee it, but I don't think he's always going to respond that way, partially because he's going to be growing with, the realization of this and taking better care of himself. And one of my husband's colleagues who has had type 1 for longer than my mom, she said something that was really interesting to me too. And I think this isn't true for all people with type 1, but she said that, the biggest deterrent of, or I guess the biggest facilitator of, trying to take better care of myself is that you just feel crappy otherwise. And so there is this natural, like, you feel kind of crappy when you're running 300 or 350. So there, at some point that will be like, I don't really want to feel crappy anymore. And it will be hopefully somewhat of a stimulus to like a natural consequence, if you will. I don't know, do other parents have thoughts or suggestions?
I mean, I'm not a parent, but I do work with teenagers a lot. Both of my job, I'm a middle school teacher, and then as well, I coach in the high school levels and stuff. So I think one of the biggest things you can do is bring his input in. There's so many things outside of teenagers' control, and they all feel like they're ready for total control. And so really include him in that conversation and see what he needs. I think one of the best things Kendra said was, what can I do to make it easier for you? What can I do to make this work for you? And he might say, like, I need you to leave me alone for a week and just trust me for a week. And then after that week, you check in and really allow him to feel like he has some ownership in a situation where, he was dealt a situation that he has not a lot of control. So if you're able to just kind of include him in that situation and trust some of that independence, and luckily we know that kids are resilient, and eventually, they learn. Eventually they learn, I promise. That'll be, I think, really, it'll help your relationship a lot, because ultimately, like, yes, you are responsible for his well-being, and yes, you care so much, but you don't want to get into that adversarial battle over, did you check before you ate that? Did you bolus? Where are we at? What's going on? So really try and bring him into the decision-making for something that he, had no say in to begin with.
Yeah, thank you, both of you, all of you.
If I can just chime in with one thought too, I think we have a really strong bias towards behaviors, because behaviors are what we see, and we tend to react to the behaviors that we see, but they often mislead us. And really, what's more important is the emotional experience. So I think any kid's emotional the valence around diabetes is really ultimately what's going to matter the most in the long run, rather than their behavior at any moment. And there's usually, if there's the behavior that is making us uncomfortable, there's probably something underneath that should be addressed. And it's not that they're a bad kid or a liar or cheater or a sneaker, like all these things that, we're tempted to sort of, call out because they make us so nervous. So I really think that just trying to lower the temperature, when our temperatures go up, usually it means that we need to cool everything down a little bit. And generally, I think that really helps kids the most.
I love the idea of looking for the emotion behind the behavior. That's like you just nailed it.